All right, good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us here at the Newegg booth at BlizzCon 2016. We're going to do a nice PC build today. In fact, it's VR ready. And you know, this holiday season, everybody's going to be wanting to play VR, and making sure that you've got a high-powered PC, that is top of the list. Fortunately, today, we have got two of our best builders. We've got Adam Chang and Chris Todobiate. And I've practiced a long time to say that name. So welcome, guys. I'm going to turn it over to you and let you take it through a nice build.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the BlizzCon Newegg DIY workshop. We're going to show you how to build a DIY PC, VR-ready PC based on the parts we have selected. If you are curious to buy this bundle, it is on our newegg.com/BlizzCon website. You can go check that out. Thank you for stopping by. And then we're going to go through the parts list as far as anything. If you do have any questions, please feel free to ask. And if you do have some time, please check out our live stream for Blizzard on the side. The first thing we'll be talking about is our CPU, which is our i5-6600K. It is a 3.5 gigahertz CPU, dual quad core. It's generally good for any of your gaming performance needs and all the games. And the next thing we'll be talking about is our CPU cooler, which is the Thermaltake Silent 12. This cooler features a red LED to go with your color theme, and then generally is a lot more stronger than your stock cooler. If you're looking to overclock, this is the cooler you need. Next, we'll be talking about our motherboard. This is by the Asus company, Z170 Pro Gaming Aura. This motherboard comes with 3 PCI slots, can handle SLI, and then you'll notice that it does have a metal PCI slot, which is known as the Asus Safe slot. It helps to retain your GPU as well as prevent any shearing. So shearing is known as when you ship a computer and the entire PCI slot will come down. So on this side it's secured more with solder, so to ensure that your system is stable. Next I'd like to mention is it does have a 3.1 Type-C and 3.1 Type-A. What it is a lot faster. It's 2 times faster than USB 3. And then lastly, I would like to mention that this does have controllable LEDs on the side, which you can customize your color theme to go with your computer. And then we'll be talking about our RAM. This is by Kingston. We are building with a 16 gig, 2400 megahertz RAM. Timing is around 15 or 16. And then next we'll be talking about our graphics card, which is the Asus GeForce GTX 1060. This is the Turbo Edition. It is a reference. As far as anything, this is closely related to last year's GTX 980 performance. As far as anything, it does top it. So if you're looking for more bang for the buck and trying to get to that level of performance, this is the card you should be looking at. It is also ready for VR, so on the side, if you are looking, the bundle does include our HTC Vive, which is pretty much anything that you want in the future for your Christmas. Next, we'll be talking about our Intel 750 SSD. This is an 800 gigabyte NVMe PCI SSD. This reads at 2100 megabytes per second and then writes at 800 megabytes per second. Just for reference, your standard, let's say, SSD will probably run you around 500 write and 500 read. So as a reference, you'll notice it's a lot higher, almost 4 times faster on the read. Next, we'll be talking about our Seagate Firecuda. This is an SSHD, which is a solid state hard drive. What it has on is an 8 gig NAND, so essentially it will pull your files faster. This comes in 3 variances, 1, 2, and a 4 terabyte. This is generally for creatives or pro gamers. It helps you load your games faster and load your applications faster. So we've got speed everywhere. Next will be our case, which is right here. Chris? It is the N25 Versa. This is a tool-free case which you can mount all of your drives, and then is a mid-tower case. This will handle all the motherboard form factors from ATX, MATX to MITX, as well as have a USB 3 and USB 2 on the front, and then your HD audio headers. While Chris is taking that out, So, as far as anything, it does also feature a 240 millimeter radiator support. So if you're looking on the top, you can add that. And then we feature the side acrylic panel with tinted acrylic fronts. So if you do have LED fans, that will show through the front. Lastly, we will be talking about our power supply. That is our Thermaltake Tough Power Gold 750. It is a semi-modular power supply, which is a lot better for cable management in terms of if you want to hide your cables and present a very clean system. We will be showing you how to do that also within our building workshop. Again, this is the Thermaltake 750 watt Gold Tough Power. As for now, we will be taking a quick commercial break. And thank you for stopping by and checking us at BlizzCon 2016. And now a quick word from our sponsors. And welcome back to our DIY workshop featuring our VR-ready build, which you can find on newegg.com/BlizzCon. Previously, we were just talking about our specs and parts, as well as introducing everything. The first step we'll be doing in our DIY process is to mount our CPU, motherboard, and RAM. I'll be passing that off to Chris now.
Awesome. Hey guys, so we're going to go ahead and start off with our Intel CPU. Just a little chipset here. Whoop. All right. And what we're going to have to do here is we're going to have to release the tension bracket around our CPU socket and get this brace to come up so we can pop our CPU in. So all you have to do is push down on the little tension arm here, lift that up, it'll bring the whole brace up. And what you're going to want to do from there is take this gold arrow in the corner, and if you can see it, align it with the arrow that's on the brace here. So you want to match those up so that you're putting this in correctly. So I know that that's going to go in the lower left corner. So I'm going to orientate it like so and just drop it in. And you know it's in correctly when the little plastic nibs inside the socket here lock it into the slot. And then you're going to want to take this metal fork here on the brace, feed it under the secure screw here, and then just push the tension arm back down and reset it the same way you took it down. It's going to take a little bit of force, but boards are usually meant to take it. Don't be afraid. And that's it for the CPU installation. It's not too bad. From there, we're going to go ahead and install the backplate for our CPU cooler. So we're going to go ahead and take our Thermaltake backplate. It has foam on the back to protect the bracing against the back of the board, as well as secure the screws while you're screwing them in to make it a little bit easier. So I'm going to go ahead and take this. I'm going to feed my 4 screws that I need to pop up through these 4 holes on the board, on the back, and go from there. If we have any questions from the crowd while I'm doing this, because it's going to be a little silent, we are giving out trading cards for the vending machines.
Yes, sir. Feel free to come up and ask your question.
Can you tell? Working? Am I good?
It's on.
Can you tell me about the difference between the PCIe Express solid state drive and then the hybrid drive that you just showed earlier?
Yeah.
And then
The
the
difference,
pricing on it as well?
pricing as far as it goes is around $69 for the 1 terabyte. And then this one starts from anywhere from like 400 to around 900 to 1,000, depending on the size. This one comes from 400, 800, and then 1.2 terabyte. There is also one more in the middle. That's a 2.5 SSD, which is a lot cheaper, around around the same pricing, around 80 to 300, depending on what you want. The differences on it is SSHD has a 8 gig sector on front, which helps to pull the files that you use most common to increase the speed. This is generally for people who want to use your gaming, your applications should go onto that. For your OS, that's where you want the Intel 750 or another 2.5, as those are a lot bigger. Instead of an 8 gig, the entire unit is a flash memory. So for example, this is 800 gigs of full flash SSD. So speed difference-wise, hard drives will be looking around 200 megabits per second for read. SSDs will be looking around 400 to 550 for read. And then this one, you're looking around 2100 for read. So it's a tremendous difference.
Thank you. Don't forget your trading card. Thank you for participating.
Thank you very much.
Very good. All right, we'll take questions in a second. We're gonna go back for it real quick. All right, so I have my my security mounting screws for the top part of the CPU cooler already installed around these 4, like I mentioned before. So I'm gonna take these nuts and they go over the screws, and then they also have threads on the top to allow the top bracket here to be secured onto those screw heads so that they're flat and level. So I'm gonna take the rubber ends here, make sure that those are making contact with the motherboard. And I'm gonna apply tension in a diagonal pattern. So I'm gonna go here to here, and then here and here, the same way you diversify tension when you're removing a car tire. So here we go. And I'm just gonna lightly screw them in and make sure everything's in place. And then I'm gonna go in for a full tighten and make sure these are really locked in there. So. And our mount's set up. Cool. So now I'm gonna go ahead and take this, and with this I'm gonna note the orientation of the bracket that's gonna feed through the bottom of the CPU cooler right here, and notate the orientation of that, because I'm gonna want this to run parallel in length to the I/O ports in the back, so that it's shooting the exhaust from the heatsink out of your computer through the exhaust that's on your case typically. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this here. All right, so I know it's going to mount this way, and it's going to go across that way. So I'm going to want my mounting holes to run like so across the CPU. And then I'm just going to want to align those threads from the mounts I put in earlier, and then grab my screws for those. Screwdrivers. All right. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to come up right now while I'm securing these. Go ahead. The mic's right here. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, it's live.
Oh, so I was wondering, for this particular
Right,
cooler,
little closer.
for this particular cooler, is there room for an extra heatsink fan, or is it only one-sided?
Yeah, so there definitely is, since there are 2 holes here. So the way that this works is that there are wire mounting brackets on it. So you just pop these in there, and it's like a screwless mount on top of the fan. So those go into the screw holes to secure this to it. So if you could get mounting brackets for the other side, you can fit another similarly sized fan on the other side to give you dual capacity airflow through the heatsink if you wanted. It only comes with the single ear bracket for this one. There might be another model out there, but I know thermal take is usually pretty good. You might be able to purchase the brackets along with another fan separately. Yep. Very cool. Here's your trading card for participating. Thank you very much. Have a good day. So with this, I'm just going to take the screws, I'm going to hand tighten them in, and then I'm going to finish the job off with the screwdriver.
So while he's screwing in, I will talk about the cooler a bit. This is the Thermaltake Ring Silent 12. It features a 120 millimeter fan and handles up to 150 watt TDP. What's known as TDP is the it's the thermal metric for generally your parts as far as components goes. When you're selecting a CPU, for example, this CPU is the i5-6600K. It's a 125 watt. Wait.
What?
95 watt CPU. Generally, you'll have to note that in order to choose a CPU, as this is the unit that will ensure that your unit's cool and allow you to do overclock on.
Very cool, thank you, Andrew. All right, so next we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna mount the CPU heatsink to the top of our processor. In order to do that, we're gonna wanna put thermal compound in between the copper plate of the bottom of our heatsink and the top of our CPU. My method for doing this is what's referred to as the P-drop method. So you put this in the center and you push the plunger down until you receive about a pea-sized drop of thermal compound. Like so. And what that's going to allow us to do is that when we apply pressure to this plate and secure it to this mount, it's going to spread that perfectly across the top of our CPU and give it all of the thermal conductivity that we require to cool this thing. While I'm doing this, if anyone else has any questions, we are giving out trading cards for the vending machines. So, or if you just want to talk, Andrew.
All right. Well, as far as anything, yes, sir. Feel free to step up.
So when you apply the thermal paste, what are the ramifications of adding too much?
So if you add too much to the top of it, what's going to end up happening is it's going to leak over the edges of the silver part of the top of the processor, and if it gets on the chip, then you're going to have bad times. You're not going to notice anything immediately, but it's going to be dissipating heat off the top of it incorrectly because that's also touching the rest of your thermal paste. The idea is to keep the thermal paste as a thin sheet on top of the silver part of your processor. Anything past that, your hardware is not going to last as long just because it's not being, the heat from it's not being dissipated correctly and it's being taken to other parts that aren't supposed to be heated. So, yeah, very good. Here's a trading card for you. Thanks for participating.
One thing to know about the plate is generally when you're building and choosing a CPU cooler, there are different plate methods. Generally on the stock coolers, you'll see you plug in the cooler. It's a lot easier. Just note that on stock coolers, you can't really get to the farthest overclock if that's what you're looking for. That is also why we have the i5-6600K. K at the end signifies that it's an unlocked CPU and that you can overclock it. As far as anything, this is 3.5 stock, and then we'll push to 3.9 turbo boost. That will ensure that you get more performance out of your CPU. So if you're the type that wants to get the best bang for your buck, you generally want to overclock. So on this level, we selected, instead of a stock cooler, we're going to do a aftermarket cooler, and then this one has a much higher support for thermal.
Any more questions from the crowd? All right, cool. So I did ungoof the orientation on this guy. So I reset it so that the bar would go across correctly and the heatsink would be orientated towards the back of the exhaust, like I mentioned earlier. So let me go ahead and secure this up. All right, cool. So the last of our screws for the top of this are going to be on that bar I mentioned earlier for Thermaltake. So they're just mounted on there. You're not going to have to finagle with them too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my 2 fingers and make sure this is sitting flat on the bottom of that. And then I'm going to slowly lower it over the top while slowly applying pressure to that little puddle of thermal compound. And once it's there, I'm going to hold this tight so that this doesn't move around and spread the thermal compound incorrectly, and secure the screws, alternating until it's totally secure onto the brace.
Another thing to know about the thermal paste is when you add too much, it is standardly a medium to transfer heat. However, if you add too much, it creates a thick layer that helps to insulate the heat instead of transfer the heat. So that's also something you want to note about putting on the thermal paste.
And that's it for mounting the brace. So this is now on there secure. The next step is going to be to secure our fan to the heatsink. And as I mentioned before when the question was asked about adding another, so it has these wire mounting brackets on each side with these hooks. You're going to want to pop these on so these are orientated towards the side that you want to pop the fan onto. And those little hooks are going to go into the screw holes that you'd normally use to mount it to your case as a screwless mount for this, so it's really convenient. So I'm going to go ahead and orientate the cord and wrap it around for cable management purposes in the future. And if you look right here, typically your CPU pin connectors will be to the north right of where your CPU is. So I'm going to have to connect it in there, and knowing that, I'm going to wrap this around and have it dead end like that into the connector. So let's go ahead. And then orientation-wise for push-pull, this is typically intake. So facing this way, this is going to pull into you, and facing this way, it's going to push out. So I want to push out towards the exhaust. I'm going to go ahead and intake this so that it's pulling air and then pushing it through our heatsink out, out through the back of our PC build. I'm waiting for the yells now.
They're cheering for you, man.
So good at building PCs. Oh, almost forgot about the wire there. All right, we're going to go this way. Bam. All right, so I'm going to take those arrow points, lock them into the screw holes, make sure that's nice, tight, and secure. And like so, it's connected, and then I'm just going to take the pinhead connector and connect that to my CPU fan pinhead, which is this one right here. And that's it for that. So our heatsink is now fully assembled. You won't have to worry about that anymore. Next, we're going to go for our memory sticks. It's pretty simple. You're going to have your 4 channels here. Typically on the board, there will be a diagram of what's referred to as the DIMM channels. And for most motherboards, it's going to be the closest slot to your CPU and then the third slot away from your CPU as the dual channel optimal like memory positioning. So you want to seat your sticks in those channels so that they work really well together. And you're going to want to notate where this notch is because it's offset slightly. You do have to orientate this in a certain way. For this board, it only has one side that has movable braces. So it makes it a little bit easier not having to secure 2 of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, orientate my notch, and I'm going to secure the side that doesn't move first. So I'm going to go for the first one. I'm going to push down hard on the side that doesn't move. That's locked in. And then around here on the back, I'm going to push this down until this little arm secures itself over the notch inside the memory stick, like so. Pretty simple. So I'm going to do the same thing for the third DIMM slot here. Back part first, and then again the arm, and that's it for our CPU cooler and memory installation.
So that does conclude our second portion. Before we go into another commercial break, thank you for attending BlizzCon 2016 and checking our workshop. We will be taking a quick word from our sponsors, so please stick around.
Very good.
and welcome back again to our DIY workshop at BlizzCon 2016. Thank you again for attending. And previously we talked about the specs we're building, as well as mounted our components, CPU cooler, and memory onto our motherboard. Next we will be talking about the case, mounting the power supply, and then mounting our motherboard. As far as anything, we will be talking about the case right now. Currently, Chris will be working to disassemble the case, as it does make the process a lot easier. Most people are generally more finicky on taking out the case, but one thing we want to note is you can always pull off the top panel and the front panel of the case. So again, it does have a side acrylic panel to show off all of your goodies. Generally, you spend a lot of money on your components, so I assume you'd want to show it off. On the back, we have the cable management area, where you have a 2.5 SSD mount, as well as all of your internal cables over there. And he'll pull off the front panel, which generally you will be using to access your front fans if you want, or install any front fans. And then lastly, he's going to remove the top panel, which gives you access to mount your 240mm radiators on top, if that's your preference, as well as he's going to pull out the I/O cables, which is the input-output cables for your front panel. So the advantages, again, to disassembling the case is to be able to cable and to hide all your cables to ensure that none of it is shown in front. It is a process that we will be showing you how to do, as this is how we plan to build.
All right, so for this case in particular, me and Andrew have looked at this, and you wouldn't typically do this, but we're going to install the power supply first. And the reason behind that is knowing that our motherboard's going to require a supplemental CPU power connection up top, which is going to equate to this area right here on top of the CPU. And our cutout right here is going to be blocked once we put the motherboard in. So after we've assembled this a few times, we determined that doing it this way is going to be a lot easier than trying to finick it behind the motherboard. So we're just going to go ahead and take this, and our power supply mounting area on this case is right here. So I'm just going to go ahead and slide this in with the fan facing downward, and like so. And then I'm just going to take this is a semi-modular power supply, so it's going to come with your main your main motherboard power connector and your supplemental CPU power connector already attached, and then all of your other power connections are going to be optional, so there's not a lot of clutter inside your case. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and feed it through our cable management cutouts in the case, like so. And then I'm going to go ahead and secure the power supply to the back of the case here with 4 case screws.
Okay. While he is mounting the power supply, this power supply is a 750 watt power supply. What's noted is it's a thermal take tough power. The thing that you want to note when you're purchasing a power supply, this is one of the most important components of your computer, as generally people want to cheap out, but when you do, you could risk your hardware as well as another time building your computer, because when your power supply goes out, you have to recable everything. So as you watch him right now, he's in the process of just installing it, so I'm sure you don't want to waste your own time. So generally, one thing you want to look at is the certification. If you see that a power supply is 80 plus certified, it ensures that it's been tested by another agency known as 80 plus. They will test the power supply and ensure that it is within the wattage specification and efficiency for power. So if it's a 750 watt power supply with 80 plus gold, this is around, I think, an 85 efficiency. So once it hits load, you're going to be getting that and ensure to get that. Next thing, we want to note that most of it, the things that you want to look at in power supply, there are rails, 5 volt, 3.5, and 12 volt. 12 volt is what runs your CPU and GPU, and that's what you'll be using to calculate your amperage usage.
Very good. So what we're going to do next is we're going to mount our I/O shield. This is our input-output protective cover that's going to mount onto our case, and then our I/O ports from our motherboard are going to feed through that. So knowing the orientation of the board, where these are going to be pointing upward, I'm going to go ahead and take that and then orientate it the same way inside the case.
One thing to know is it does take a little force to put in the I/O panel. Don't be afraid to add a little force, but be careful that you don't bend the I/O panel, as it's a very thin aluminum piece of metal.
All right. You don't have to get every notch. There are little notches on the outside of the steel that actually secure this to the case. I typically will just make sure that it's there, and then as I feed in my motherboard and secure it into the case, it'll just lock this into the position that it needs to be. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the case for motherboard installation. But before that, I'm going to route the supplemental CPU power cord up through the top like I mentioned earlier, save myself a little bit of trouble, and just kind of leave it hanging there for later use. Oh, no, that's fine. I'll just drop it. All right, so I'm going to grab my motherboard. I'm going to take the exhaust case fan pin connector and shove that back through these ports here so that it's out of the way. And again, I'm going to orientate the I/O ports so they're going to go through that shield I just installed. Like so. Again, we are taking questions while we're doing installation, so if you ask questions, we will be giving out trading cards to the vending machine. Thank you very much.
One thing to note, generally for the case, it's set for MATX standard, so when you're adding an ATX board, which is a larger form factor, you're going to need to add 3 more standoff screws to the side in order to mount the board. If those of you that are joining that don't quite understand ATX, MATX, MITX, these are the form factors and the size of your board. Generally, the ATX is the standard form factor. If you go into the higher end, it's the EATX, which is extended ATX. And then you have the smaller line, which is MATX, and then goes down to MITX on the side. If you have a question, you can step up and ask.
Sorry, with the new video cards, do you need additional cooling besides the heatsink and what's built in?
As far as this one, for example, most of the GPUs will not need additional cooling. As far as anything, if you stay within the stock parameters, saying you're not trying to overclock. However, if you are trying to overclock, then you will start to work into liquid cooling. So you'll start to see that they'll remove this heatsink right here, and they'll add a clear block to allow water to go through and transfer the heat. If you're trying to stay stock and not trying to modify it too much, then you could buy a higher end. For ASUS, they have the higher end known as Strix, S-T-R-I-X. Their line comes with a heavier heatsink as well as 2 or 3 fans to help with the heat dissipation.
And with the smaller cases, is that still the same thing? They won't have heat issues?
As far as smaller cases, generally they won't. You will see that on the smaller size, there's usually a mini series. So for the GTX 1060, 1070, there's a shorter card. What happens is it creates less heat dissipation, has around the same performance, and then you will basically gauge on the airflow for your system to pull out most things. But everything is usually within stock parameter, and they have thresholds to ensure that your hardware functions across all sides, no matter what size you build at.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
Only one, sorry.
So while he is mounting the screws, there is something I wanted to mention. We are using a air cooling option. This is again an aftermarket Thermaltake Ring 12 Silent. On the side note, there are 2 other cooling sectors. That's the AIO, which is liquid cooling, but it's all in one. What it is it's a radiator attached to a pump to the heatsink, so you don't have to maintain or add any water. It will generally just flow through and maintain itself. You'll get the same around a lot better overclock ability and thermal ability to overclock your system if you're looking to overclock it. And then the next level after that would be open loop cooling, where you're going to start to see some of the special units where they have coolants all variants of colors, color fans, radiators. If you guys at BlizzCon want to check it out, we have a system right there that is open loop. It is green, and you can get a feel for how open loop looks like. As far as anything, we'll pass back to Chris.
Very good. So I have my 9 motherboard screws mounted inside, so our motherboard's now secure inside our case. From there, I'm going to go ahead and take those power cords that we got earlier. I'm going to route them through the appropriate connectors here, or sorry, cable management cutouts to where the motherboard main power connector is. And I'm going to line up the little notch here with the notch that's on the connector type there. Just align it like so and apply a little bit of pressure. Wait for the click or for it to secure itself around the notch, and you're done with that. And then next I'm going to go ahead and take the supplemental CPU connector that we routed up here earlier, and same thing, align the notches and connect. And you're done there powering up your CPU. We're going to move on to the other parts.
Cool. Yes, we have a question?
So if I built my computer about 2 years ago and I was putting a new video device in, would I also need to upgrade the power supply?
That will be dependent on how big your original power supply is, and then how much of an upgrade you're going with your graphics card. Generally, if you take a look at the graphics card box, there is a minimum requirement for the power supply. If you're not too sure about that, you can just follow through with the instructions and just get the minimum power supply. As far as anything, do we have any more questions? Yes. Oh yeah, feel free to step up before we go into our commercial break.
You mentioned earlier about not wanting to be cheap about the components you're buying. What would you ballpark the items you have on the table would cost? Earlier you mentioned not wanting to be cheap about the products you're buying for your components. What would you ballpark the whole package you guys have right now on the table?
This system's around 22. As far as anything, majority of the cost will go into this SSD. This SSD is pretty much one of the top of the line SSDs, which is where, again, you're going to incur most of the cost. We have a separate bundle that's around $1,400 with a smaller SSD. Mm-hmm.
As far as cooling, what do you recommend, a fan or the liquid? Like, is it like a preference? Is it which one works better, or is it just preference on how installing?
It's preference. It's also based on like what your situation is, where you're putting your computer. If you're putting it on the carpet, air cooling might not be the best situation for you. You're pulling in more dust into your system. It's going to require more cleaning. Hardware's not going to last as long type stuff, right? So, I mean, if you have hardwood floors and you have like central AC and stuff, you're not worried about dust too much. Air cooling is probably not that much of a threat for you. But if you're worried about that type of stuff, I mean, you're also going to get better temperatures if you go with AIO than you would an air-cooled option. So that's going to allow you to, with the K model Intel chipsets that are unlocked, overclock your CPU once you get to the point where you need a little bit more oomph, a lot easier. Yeah.
Also, another question. For as far as installing, is it easier or for the...
What? One more time, a little bit louder?
For the installment on the cooling, is it easier the liquid or the fan?
The AIO all-in-one liquid coolings are a little bit more like difficult, but it's the same scenario where you have to install a back plate. You're gonna have to install. You're gonna have tubes that connect to a radiator from the block that's gonna go on top of your CPU. So you're gonna have to manage like where those tubes are gonna go. You don't want those to go over like important stuff. You know, it just requires a little bit more consideration when you're doing the install. Air cooling is a little easier, but yeah, I feel it's worth the all-in-ones. I have one in my PC. Don't have to worry about temps.
As far as pricing, is it like a big difference or is it similar?
So, like entry-level AIOs are gonna run you, I would say like $50 like minimum. If you were to spend $50 on an aftermarket air cooler, you'd get a beast air cooler. So it's like, you could spend maybe like 25 up to 50 on a aftermarket air cooler and get something that's really, really good. That's almost like on the tier of all-in-one, but the all-in-ones are just less hassle. You don't have to clean them. I don't know, yeah. So,
another thing you did mention that the liquid cooling systems. As far as anything, there is another section after we can check out right after this one. It's the thermal take open loop DIY. So they'll show you the complexity about how to bend tubes, how to set up the radiator, and what's the main components of liquid cooling. So you can stick around for that one.
That's more for like a custom setup if you wanted like tubes running all around your system, like looking real cool. So yeah, if you're into that.
Next question.
For like M.2 storage, like is there something that you would have to get for like a specific motherboard that would support it or something?
And obviously you have to get a motherboard that has an M.2 socket. If you don't, I believe they sell PCI adapter cards, which come with M.2 slots. You can install it that way if your computer doesn't have them installed. If it's an older motherboard, doesn't have the slots. Yeah.
So M.2 is a different type of interface?
Yeah, it's
okay. It doesn't use SATA? It doesn't use SATA?
It does use SATA
Oh.
for the storage type. In order to store on the SSD, it has to be a SATA type. Some boards will come with dual M.2s, where one is a SATA that you can use for storage, and the other is a PCIe specific one that's used to RAID together with the first one to either create a passive backup or increase your read-write speeds even more.
Okay.
Yep.
And are these parts going to be the ones that are used in the speed contest?
One more time?
Are these parts going to be the ones that are used in the speed building competition?
I don't think that counts as a question for here, but yes.
Okay.
There you go.
Since I wasn't here earlier, I was actually just wondering what...
Little louder, sorry.
Sorry. I wasn't here earlier, and so I was actually wondering what case that is.
Oh.
Thermaltake Versa N25.
Sorry, what was that?
Thermaltake Versa N25. Let me pull up the case for everyone to see.
Awesome. And how much is it?
Should run, I think, 40 to 50.
Okay.
Front and top panel. So, like so, and then this guy on the front. It's got like full acrylic, which are a lot like your LED fans. Oh, sorry. It's got like acrylic on the front panel, so your LEDs will show through on your fans if you have those. And then, standard I/O ports. You have USB 3.0, two 2.0 connectors, and your HD audio auxiliary connectors as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you for participating.
Cool. Any more questions before we cut to commercial break?
Again, back to the cooling. Just
Yes,
one
sir.
more question. Well, this is a mid-size tower or a full?
One more
a
time?
tower. As far as towers, would you recommend buying a full-size tower?
Me personally, I went for a Cooler Master mid tower when I first built my first one, and it was a super solid case. Really heavy though. So like when it came to like moving around and cleaning it, it was always a hassle. So when I built the computer I currently use now, I went for an MATX case, which is a little bit cooler in that I guess demographic of like cases. They get a little bit more creative with like the spacing and everything because it's like you want to fit as much in as you can. But it does require, it's a little bit harder to cable manage inside the smaller cases, but I think the smaller footprint to me personally is worth it. Yeah, full towers would be more if you're like going for like a home NAS or something like that. You just want to pop a bunch of old hard drives in there or whatever. And then mid towers are your like pretty standard. These are going to be around like the entry level price points, stuff like that. You're going to pay a little bit more for the smaller form factor ones usually. So yeah.
Awesome. So all the questions seem to have been answered. We will be cutting to a short commercial break. As far as anything, thank you again for coming to watch us at BlizzCon 2016 and attending our DIY build workshop featuring our VR ready machine. Now a short word from our sponsors.
Thank you.
Hard work makes the athlete, but the edge of a Core i7 processor makes you unstoppable.
And welcome back to our DIY workshop featuring our VR-ready PC, which you can find at newegg.com/BlizzCon. Once again, we've talked about the specs, how to mount, what to mount for the motherboard, and then taking about the case. The next section we're going to be going to is handling all of our nitty-gritty with our meaty stuff. So our graphics card, our hard drive, our SSD, and then some of the cabling. Chris will take it away from here.
Cool. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and lay this flat again so we can get in the workspace. And cool. So first thing I'm going to grab is the hard drive. So for this case in particular, it comes with tool-free mounting brackets for your mechanical drives and your SSDs. So the 4 screw holes here will allow you to also secure a 2.5 SSD inside this with no problem. But we're going to use it for the mechanical drive, and for that it has 4 plastic nibs around the edges that are going to lock into our screw mounting holes for the mechanical drive. And the way I'm going to orientate this is I know it's going to drop in this way with these pinchers towards the back. I'm going to want to face the mechanical drive connectors towards the back cabling area so that I can connect the SATA port and the power connections later. So I'm going to go ahead and mount this like so. And then just drop it right in. Easy. From there, I'm going to go ahead and install our graphics card before we move over to cable management space. This is just going to go into our first PCIe slot here that's closest to our CPU. And then we're going to secure it to the back of the case with some case screws.
While he's plugging in and screwing that in, this is again the Asus Turbo GTX 1060 6 gig. This card is recently released. Its performance is equivalent to a GTX 980 of last year, which if you are familiar with the price point of both, this one's coming in around 200 to 250, I think, and then the 980 before was around 400 to 500. So you're looking around the same performance as well as VR entry for a much, much lower cost. Another thing to note that this card does require a 6-pin video card plug-in for the GPU. So when you're buying your power supply, you should note that as well. If you are buying the bundle, then you're good to go. As far as anything, I did want to note that the Turbo line is more of the entry-level line. If you're looking for more overclock and more ability, they have the Strix line, which has heavier overclock, heavier heat sinks to handle any of the gaming you would need, and as well as the overclock.
All right, so we have our graphics card securely mounted into the case. Now we're going to take our semi-modular power supply cables that we're going to need, which, let me untangle these. So we have our power cable for our SATA connections, which are going to go to our mechanical drive, and then we also have our PCI Express connector types, which is going to feed in to the card and power that puppy up. So let's go ahead and switch over to the back side of this. And again, with the cable management space, I know that this end is going to plug into the many sockets that are on the front of the power supply here. Oh. Right here. So I'm going to feed that in through the same cutout that I fed the other connectors from the power supply earlier. And then just connect that to the power supply.
While it's connecting that, it is great to note that this power supply is a 750 watt. It is able to handle more cards than one. So as far as anything, you'll note that he has 2 cables selected. We have pre-selected 2 cables that we need for the build. As far as anything, this is a semi-modular power cable. So on the side, there's more cables if you ever need. That is the pros and that is the benefit of having the modular, as you can of course remove cables to make it a more complete build.
All right, cool. So I also connected my SATA power connector for the mechanical drive, and we're going to go ahead and connect our hard drive up. So for that, we're going to go ahead and clear the wire space, and I'm going to take my SATA connector right here. And if you can see that, there's a little L shape for the connector type. And on the back of our mechanical drive, we have one large L-shaped connector and a smaller L-shaped connector. The larger one's going to be for our power connection. So we're going to plug that in. And then I'm going to also grab a SATA cable for our data connection, which this one's going to plug into the smaller L shape right next to the power connector. And then I'm just going to route this to where I know the SATA connectors are on the motherboard. And I'll connect those later when we switch back to the front. So then the next thing will be our power for our graphics card. And I'm going to push this through this cutout. And then just connect the 6-pin here on the graphics card. Cool. Now we have our graphics card connected. I'm going to grab the SATA connection that I pulled in earlier. I'm going to connect that to the motherboard. For the SATA connector types, some boards will have both the newer 6 GB a second transfer SATAs and also the older 3 GB second SATA connectors. You're going to want to refer to your motherboard manual if you have both, and you're definitely going to want to plug in any main drives that are going to be containing your operating system, video games, and programs they use constantly to your fastest connector type.
So while he's plugging it in, it is ready to mention that this is the Seagate Fire CUDA drive. This, again, is an SSHD. It features an 8 gig NAND that allows faster boot for most of your programs as well as data pull. So this is a little level above hard drive. So as far as anything, this is, again, known as the SSHD, which is solid state hard drive.
All right, so that does it for the power connector types on our PC. We're just going to go ahead and plug in our SSD there. And I also forgot to plug in our exhaust fan pinhead, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and grab the next applicable slot that'll fit this PCIe connector type, which is this PCIe, the second PCIe by 16. Even though it is a larger than this requires, it'll still work perfectly fine. So we're just going to go ahead and pop that in. And again, the same with the graphics card. We're going to go ahead and secure that to the case with another case screw.
Well, securing that, this is the Intel 750 series SSD. This is one of the first PCIe NVMe SSDs. This write speed is around 800 megabytes comparative to around 500, 550 on the standard 2.5 SSDs. The read speed is around 2100 comparative to 550 on SSD, so there's around 4 times the speed of standard SSD. So if that's the performance you're looking for, that's definitely what you can consider. Another form factor that we aren't using right here but should be brought up is the M.2 form factor, which if you look on the side, there's a small slot for M.2. These have two types of interfaces, SATA and PCIe. Depending on which interface you choose, the speed that you'll be getting. SATA is, again, cap out at around 550, and then read speed for PCIe will be around 21 to 2800, depending on your size.
All right, so our exhaust pin connector is connected. Our SSD is secured to the case. Last thing we're going to do is go ahead and connect our front panel connectors from our top panel of the case. So this guy that we pulled off earlier, we're going to go ahead and reattach. I'm I'm going to feed the wires in, same way I pulled them out, through this cutout on the top. Yep.
So currently he's taking the cables to pull back to the back in order to cable manage. The cables that are attached to the top panel are usually your front panel connectors. So it'll be your USB 2.0, USB 3.0, and then the front audio panel, front audio headers. USB 3 you'll generally see in blue color code. USB 2 you'll see as a 9-pin. There's a pin that's knocked out so you can differentiate to know where you plug it into. And then same goes with the front audio header. You'll notice that there's a tiny little notch that you can't put a pin through. So that's where you can use the key to reference to put in your cables.
All right, so for this case in particular, sometimes you'll find your USB 3.0 connector at the bottom here with all the other pins on the bottom of the motherboard. But for this particular motherboard, the 3.0 connector is right here on the middle of the left side of the board. So I'm going to go ahead and feed that through that front panel connector. Let's see. This guy right here, blue USB 3.1 or 3.0, sorry. Just going to feed that through and attach that later once I get the chance. And then all of my other front panel connectors, I'm going to feed through the same bottom hole here and route those to the bottom pins along the bottom of the board.
So this portion is actually one of the trickier parts. If you've ever built a computer, you'll know the front panel header is actually one of the most finicky portions, as if you have big hands like us, it's a little harder to fit and aim where you're putting in the headers. As far as anything, he will be telling you how to put in the headers. You'll see a diagram on the motherboard. If there's not a diagram on the motherboard telling you which pin is which, you can always refer to your motherboard manual, which will tell you, hey, this is the power plug-in, positive, negative, HDD, LED, power LED, and then a reset switch will be your general headers you're pushing for.
All right, so our 3.0 connector is connected to the pins on the motherboard. We're going to go ahead and grab our front panel connectors next. This is the most finicky one. It's a bunch of tiny little headers, so we're going to go ahead and look at our motherboard. This motherboard in particular has a diagram in the lower right here, which you might not be able to see, but it details all of the what all the pins correlate to, and all of these are marked with the names of the pins that you're required to plug them into. So we're going to go ahead and look at the diagram. So in the first four pins on the left side, I know that is the power LED and the hard drive LED. So I'm going to grab those two headers. I have my hard drive LED here, and then my power LED here, these two single guys. So I'm going to go ahead and shape these into a square. As close as I can, like so. Oh, like so, if you guys can see that. And then I'm just going to go ahead and plug that into the 4 pins on the leftmost side with the hard drive LED facing downward and the power LEDs facing upward as the diagram shows.
So generally for the LEDs, there are two. There's a power LED, which generally you'll have a solid LED when you look at the front of the case. The second one will be your hard drive LED, which will respond as your hard drive accessed. There is something to note: when you're doing the hard drive SSD with your solid state, you generally won't see much flashing, as is triggered by the electricity pull. So when you see a mechanical drive pull, you'll start to see a flash. On the SSD, you may not see too much of a distinct flash when it accesses the information. And one very important thing to note is there's a positive and a negative side to the headers. If you take a close look at the headers, there's a small little arrow on the header, that's the positive, and the unmarked one is the negative one.
All right, so then I'm going to grab the last two sets of front panel connectors, which are the power switch and the reset switch, which are going to allow you to turn your computer off and then reset it as well. And I'm going to look at the diagram. And I see that the power switch goes on top and the reset switch goes on the bottom. So I'm going to make them into another 2x2 header block and then connect them the same way I did the first two. And that's it for our front panel connectors. Hard part's over. Next, we just got to connect our USB 2.0 for the top panel USB ports and our HD audio connector so that you can connect your headphone auxiliary cables to the front and still get sound. Typically, I go for the USB first because it's the closest to the front panel connectors. And for that one, it's marked on the board, but if it's not, what I usually do is I'll find the pin set that's missing a pin in the same orientation as the connector type, so I know that this is missing one in the upper corner. And there's two USB connector types here that are both missing that. I'm just going to orientate it so that the missing header aligns with the missing pin, and just plug that right in. Done. USB 2.0 connected, and then we're just going to grab the HD audio, which is typically on the leftmost of the board, on the bottom. And then the same thing with this one. I'm just going to notate that there is a missing header, the second one from the top right. And I'm just going to orientate that to correspond with the pins that are there and connect it.
One thing to note, on older cases, you may see two front audio connectors. This one is an HD audio. Some of the older cases will have an AC97 and HD audio. Depending on what your board has, you'll choose one or the other. So you don't need to plug in both in if you do have a case with both.
And I believe that's it. We're going to go ahead and reassemble the front panel. And then we're going to go ahead and connect the side panels.
Okay, before we complete the assembly and talk about smaller details of the system, we are going to go to a small commercial break. Thank you again for attending BlizzCon 2016 and coming out of your busy schedules, see our DIY workshop featuring our VR Ready build again. And now for a short word from our sponsors. And welcome back to our DIY workshop at BlizzCon 2016. Again, we are building the VR ready machine, or actually have built the VR ready machine right here. As far as anything, we've took the liberty on the side brake to assemble the case.
I'm going to go ahead and take this panel off and talk a little bit about the cable management area real quick. So we don't have zip ties up here, but if this were my PC, I would have routed these cables along. There's little grooves right here on the back area which allow you to slip a zip tie in there and then secure your wiring in a much more efficient way if you're super OCD about wiring, which I am, just not in this case. But also, there are cases that don't have that, and for those that offer cable management with that, they usually put a little indentation in the side panel, which will allow a little bit of clutter or like above the place where the panel will lock in, and still allow you to just push down and then close without harming your wires or compressing the case in a way it's not supposed to be.
This only applies to cases with the extra punch-out panels. Sometimes, if you check the cases, they'll have if it's a flat panel, then generally they should have an extra spacing behind the case. However, you'll have to really know on your case if you want to do cable management.
So we're going to go ahead and connect our power cord. And we're not installing an operating system on this. We're just getting it to boot. So
as far as anything, to touch upon the operating system basis, you'll notice right now we did not touch upon the ODD, if you can show them this front side. So on our build, there is no ODD. For the people that are familiar with building a computer, generally you're going to put in a disk and install your OS. We want to note that for Windows 10, there are USB deployments. So you can choose to buy a Windows with a USB or a disk, and all you have to do is plug it in. Once you plug it in, you can select it to boot, and it'll install for you. So that'll save you a lot of time. The advantages on a disk compared to a USB is it's much, much, much faster.
alternatively, if you wanted to bring your Windows 7 or something over, you could make a boot drive for that operating system and then use your same product key and install it through the USB the same way. Windows offers a disk to key tool, which you just pop your disk in, you pop a USB in, it'll copy it over, make it exactly what you need to be. You just go plug it into your new system, and your operating system installs. We'll be taking any questions you guys might have for the end of this. We can walk up to the mic over here and talk very loudly into it. Yeah, we can't hear you from there, sorry.
Hold it up. Hello, hello. So what made you choose the thermal take power source? Based on what criteria?
As far as the power supply selection is due to being semi-modular, as you also look at the power supply cables, they're thin, flat cable design, which makes the cabling a lot easier for us. So if you ever look at other power supplies, there'll be red, yellow, green wires. Those notify the voltages on the power supply. However, for this one, we selected due to it being a semi-modular. We don't have to have as much cables to clutter. It suffices for all of our build and part needs and power needs, and then allows us to expand in the future. If you do want to SLI, unfortunately for 1060 you can't SLI. For 1070 then you'll be able to set in another graphics card and upgrade it for double the performance with some loss.
Thank you for participating. Oh, have another question?
You got another question.
Another question.
Will
Here we
750 be enough for an SLI?
750, from what I remember, does not SLI. Generally, from what I know of, 960 did SLI, 970, 980, 980 Ti.
No, I mean 750 watts.
750 watt is generally enough. On the newer end cards, you always have to look at your power drawage. So if you're not sure, you can always refer to like NVIDIA or AMD's website and check their requirements. They have a section for if you have multiple GPUs, what you need. Generally, the GPU calculation is a lot different because you're only adding on GPU instead of a full system. So minimum power requirement, you can't just double it. So you can reference it online.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. Thank you for taking part in the workshop, coming by to see us. Anything else you want to say?
Yeah.
Have a good BlizzCon.
Thank you again for stopping by for BlizzCon 2016 DIY Workshop. We will be having the liquid cooling portion after. If you're curious about how to bend tubes, set up your radiators, and make it a lot more shinier than this. So for liquid cooling, again, if you're interested, the open loop is right there. You can check that out. And then come back at around, I think, well. You can check the schedule online, and then they'll show you how to bend, set up, and the advantages of liquid cooling. And then lastly, we will have our raffle at 1:30 and
5:30 if you complete our scavenger hunt, and if you're in the crowd, please stay seated until you receive your cards.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you, and have a great
that
BlizzCon.
concludes everything, and thank you again. Have a great day.